Greetings fellow Gorehounds and welcome back to another October catch-up vlog. So this movie isn't a movie that I actually watched in theaters. This is a movie that was recommended to me by a friend at a Halloween party and happened to be on Netflix at the time of the recommendation. And the movie I'm of course talking about is a very unique and strange Australian kinda horror film called Boys in Trees. And the thing about this movie is that I knew next to nothing about this movie going in, and my friend refused to tell me any details about it, except the fact that the movie happens to take place on Halloween night. And let me just say that I kind of want to continue that tradition and not give you too many details about it because I fucking loved this movie. This movie had me crying by the end of it. What few details I will tell you about it though is that it's essentially about a guy who's actually grown up into being like this bully figure and this kind of asshole who hangs out with these other assholes. And at the beginning of the movie, they bully this one kid at a skate park, and it turns out that this kid used to be good friends with the main character. But at some point they had a falling out and the main character ended up becoming part of the bully crew. But this one Halloween night in the late 90s, because the movie actually takes place in the late 90s, the main character is having this very understandable existential crisis because he doesn't want life to be the way it is forever. He's a high school kid who's about to graduate and kind of wants to go off and like live in New York and become a photographer. He doesn't want to just be getting high in graveyards his whole life with a bunch of assholes and like TPing people's houses. He wants to actually go somewhere and be somebody. And so one night when he's out with his friends, TPing houses, bullying kids, getting high and drunk, he actually wanders off away from his friends and ends up running into the kid that they bullied earlier in the movie, the guy that used to be his best friend back in the day. They have this strong confrontation that leads to him eventually walking his friend home. And it's this journey walking his friend home that ends up becoming the entirety of the rest of the movie. And you think, based on what I'm describing right here, that this is some sort of drama about old friends and bullies and yada yada yada, but there's actually way more to it than that, because it turns out All Hallows Eve is the night in which the dead come out to play. But that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens. I'm not going to tell you what revelations happens. I'm not going to tell you where this character goes. You're going to have to watch all that for yourself. But let me tell you, from start to finish, this movie is fucking fantastic. Super emotional and heart-wrenching and just... good God, this is a great movie. Now, mind you, it is a slow burn. It's not a super fast-paced movie. It takes its time. So if you need very fast, cheap thrills, then this is not the movie you should check out. Go watch the latest blockbuster if that's what you're looking for. This movie is for people who want to sit down and really digest a film. And with that all said, I'm going to provide some sort of Amazon affiliate link in the description below. Hopefully a link to the movie itself if Amazon has it. And I don't know what more to say, so let's move on to the spoilers. But I recommend don't fucking watch the spoilers if you haven't watched the movie yet. Watch the movie first because god damn it, you deserve to see this movie. In fact, I already feel like I've told you way too much. And with that said, let us move on to the spoilers. Alright, so I basically told you the basic setup for the first, 20 minutes of this movie at the beginning of this vlog. But there's a couple details I left out because I didn't want to spoil too many things. For example, there's a whole subplot developed at the beginning of this movie about the head bully of the bully crew and how he's really not cool with the idea of the main character leaving because he kind of considers the main character his best friend. And you can tell the idea of his best friend leaving is also linked with his idea of, oh god, I'm going to be stuck here forever. I'm going to be the bully my whole life. And when I'm old and dying, there's going to be no one who's going to show up at my funeral, even the people I considered my friends. Because it turns out, even they don't actually like me because I'm an asshole. But this is not the kind of movie that ever outright tells you any of these dynamics. You just kind of experience them and figure them out for yourselves. But don't worry, they're very apparent. This movie isn't very obtuse. Well, it's kind of obtuse about some of the supernatural stuff, but that's later on. And really, that's the kind of stuff the movie should be obtuse about, because there should be this question by the end of this movie whether or not any of his spiritual journey was real. But ultimately, it doesn't actually matter whether it was real, physically or not, because the point is, it was real emotionally. And I hope that I'm making sense here, because I realize that for some people that might be a little bit confusing, because it's kind of confusing to describe, but hopefully I explained it clear enough. And it turns out there's actually a second subplot developed at the beginning of this movie about this girl that the main character kind of develops this crush on. Except it's kind of a mutual crush. She kind of really likes him and he kind of really likes her, except he's not willing to admit that to himself because he's been such an asshole. Or I guess a better way to put it, he's developed this asshole persona that doesn't allow him to actually internally access his real emotions. But they're still there, but he can't actually express them because then he wouldn't seem cool among his friends. Which is part of the problem. He's feeling so stifled by his environment that he doesn't feel like he can actually access his real emotions without being ostracized by the people around him. Which, believe you me, is something I relate to a whole lot. There's been many moments in my life where I feel like I've been stifled in that way. Either because I've surrounded myself by the wrong people, or I was not being true to who I really was, or a combination of the two, so that part of this main character's journey I related to hardcore. But the thing that's very clear is I never got as bad as the main character apparently did by the beginning of this film. And ultimately, it's kind of his own damn fault, and that's kind of what this movie's about. In fact, this girl that the main character kind of develops this crush on is one of the first people to point this out to him, that he is way less of an asshole when he's not around his friends. Anyway, I still have really only talked about like the first 20 minutes of the movie so far, because when we get past that point, that's when the movie gets really fucking deep on a spiritual, emotional, and just like overall intellectual level. And I kind of want you all to experience that for yourselves. I don't want to dive too much into it, but I will give some details. Because essentially what this movie is after that first 20-minute mark is it essentially becomes a Halloween version of A Christmas Carol. But this movie is definitely not one-to-one with A Christmas Carol the same way that like Happy Death Day was with Groundhog's Day. It's still its own movie with its own details and its own events and doesn't actually have like, oh, this is the Ghost of Christmas Past moment. But at the end of the day, it still has this core element about this asshole character going on a spiritual journey through his past, present, and future in order to realize how asshole-ish he has become and how he needs to break away from that so that he can live the life he wants to. And so that he can actually make amends for his sins of the past. And quite a lot of those sins involve his friend that he's walking home over the course of the movie. For example, there's a very specific incident in which he and his friend were bullied by the bullies and he just ran away and left the bullies to bully his friend. And then he eventually joined the bullies. And that incident was really fucked up because there's kind of this subtle implication that there's also some sexual violence involved in this bullying. And as this movie goes on, he keeps encountering this one figure, this one character who's dressed in all white, who seems to represent like the god of death or something like that. And this character is always on their tail, chasing him down, kind of this feeling like the main character is running from death. But it turns out he may not actually be the character who's running from death, but you'll have to figure out who the character who is running from death when you watch the movie yourself. Because I have just concluded that I am not going to spoil anything else for this movie, because this movie is just too damn good to spoil. So if you've liked anything I've said so far in this video, and you still have not watched the movie, then go out there and watch Boys with Trees. It's a fantastic film, it's emotionally heart-wrenching, it is really well done, it's really fucking smart, and it's the kind of movie that will sit with you for days to come, and your mind will just chew on it, and just pick out all the little details that your brain picked up on, but you didn't actually consciously pick up on, which will prompt you to want to rewatch the movie just to see if any of those details were actually accurate and you were actually picking up on them right. And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as always, my fellow Gorehounds, peace out, and I'll catch y'all later.